The darkness of space is not empty. It never was. We only believed it to be because we hadn't gone far enough. But we did. We went too far. My name doesn't matter. My face, my voice, my identity. All of it died the moment I saw. The moment he understood. You will never be the same after hearing this. If you continue, be prepared to forget who you are. Because the truth does not belong to us. Humanity has always looked to the sky for answers. We sought gods among the stars, searched for redemption in the cosmos. But what if what lies above us is not merciful? What if angels are not guardians, but predators? We made contact 3 months ago. The ship Peregrine 6 passed through a newly discovered wormhole near Proxima Centauri. On the other side, there was an untouched star system, planets floating, in silence around a pale blue sun. And then we saw it. It wasn't a planet nor a comet. It was something alive, immense, wandering the void like a whale in a dead ocean. Its form was indescribable, a maelstrom of flesh and tentacles, mouths opening and closing without making a sound, eyes shifting as if searching for something we couldn't see. Our sensors went haywire. It was larger than our mothership, larger than any human-made structure ever built. It simply floated there, orbiting a desolate planet, as if it were waiting. The first mistake was calling it an angel. The silence was broken when it began to move. One of its mouths opened, but not to speak, not to communicate. It sang. It wasn't sound. It was something that invaded the mind, a noise without frequency, without origin, without end. A hum that crawled inside our skulls like a virus starving for synapses. 3 crew members collapsed, trembling, their eyes rolling back. One of them, Lieutenant Harrow, started laughing. Not human laughter, but something distorted, like a choir of voices trapped inside his throat. And then one by one, they began to die. Not quickly. They withered. Their skin stretched tight, their bones twisted, their eyeballs sank until they disappeared. Their flesh turned gray and dry like a dead leaf lost to the wind. The last of them tried to scream, but their throat no longer held air, and we, the ones who remained, finally understood. It was not an angel, not as humans imagined. It was not a blessing, not a miracle. It was hunger. Yes, it was an angel, but not in the divine sense. In the end, angels are not messengers, they are devourers, and this was only the first. The silence had never been so oppressive. We stood there, paralyzed, unsure if we were breathing by choice or if that thing was allowing us to stay alive. A crew member's heart monitor spiked, alarms pulsing like the frantic heartbeat of something about to die. The angel moved slowly, its shifting forms twisting the space around it. Its eyes, so many eyes, watched us, as if studying, deciding, and then Lieutenant Theodore saw it. There's someone there. The words hung in the air, breaking the logic of the moment. We all turned to him. What? I murmured. Theodore was trembling, his eyes locked on a point above the creature. There's someone there, on top, riding it. I blinked, adjusting my helmet's visor. The HUD tried to focus but failed. It was too far. The thing Theodore saw was humanoid. A black silhouette, tall and slender, almost angelic in shape, but something was wrong. Arms too long, legs bent at an unnatural angle, small, stunted wings, moving like a crawling insect, and then it looked at us. I can't describe the feeling. I shouldn't have been able to see its eyes from so far away, but I did. They burned inside my mind, like searing iron pressed against the bone of my skull. Jesus Christ, someone whispered, but that thing was not God. Theodore started, hyperventilating. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead. He's talking to me, but none of us heard anything. Theodore dropped to his knees. His eyes were glassy, pupils fully dilated. He said, "We're in the garden." My blood ran cold. What garden? Theodore slowly turned his head, lips trembling. His garden. We looked again at the figure atop the angel, but now there were more. of them, 3, 4, 5 dozens, each one standing still, unmoving, staring in our direction. And the angel opened another mouth. The singing began again. Sanity was never meant to survive in space. Here, everything is a mistake. Everything is too vast, too dark, too silent. You were not born to see infinity. Your brain rejects what it cannot comprehend. It shuts down, protects itself. But what if something is strong enough to force it open? What if something pries your mind apart and pours an ocean of impossible meanings inside? That is how you die without a single scratch. That is what happened to Lewis. We ran, but there was nowhere to escape. In space, distance means nothing. You can run until your lungs collapse, but the void will always be around you. The creature's song continued, vibrating inside our helmets, inside our heads, inside us. Then, Lewis screamed. It was not a human scream. It was something primal, distorted, like a sound played in reverse. I fell to my knees from the sheer force of it, feeling as if my spine were being torn out from the inside. I looked at him. Lewis stood frozen in the middle of the ship's corridor, trembling violently. His eyes were wide, teeth clenched so hard they had begun to bleed. It was as if he was being taken apart from within. And then, we heard it. "You hear me." The words did not come through the radio. They did not come from the environment. They came inside. It was an impossible voice, without tone, without shape, without origin. A voice that existed within our minds, vibrating through the bones of our skulls. Lewis choked, his body contorting as if something were crushing his chest from the inside. "Stop! Stop! You hear me!" Lewis screamed again. The veins in his neck bulged, his eyes rolled back, showing only white. And then he vomited words. The sentences poured from his mouth as if they were tangible, as if something was force-feeding knowledge into him without a filter. Words that did not belong to any human language. Words that should never be spoken. They were impossible sounds, diseased verses, a language that was never meant to be heard. Ancient, forgotten, forbidden. And then, his skull burst, not like a gunshot, not like an impact. It was something from the inside out, like a balloon inflating too fast. The bones cracked, his eyes popped from their sockets, his brain exploded into pieces, splattering blood and fragments of flesh across the corridor. And the voice inside our heads recalibrated. We collapsed to the floor, gasping, eyes wide with pure terror. Lewis was dead. The ship fell silent. For a moment I thought it was over, but then Theodore moved. Something was different. He was too still. "Teddy?" Someone whispered. He lifted his head. His eyes were no longer his own. And then he spoke. I understand his voice was wrong, multiple. As if something was speaking through him, or worse, as if he was now someone else. He turned his head as if listening to something distant. "He is calling me." My stomach turned to ice. "Who, Theodore? Who is calling you?" He smiled. A smile that did not belong to him. And then he looked up, beyond the ship's ceiling, beyond the metal and the stars, beyond the very universe itself. And he answered, "The gardener. Madness has a smell. It's a metallic warm scent like blood boiling on exposed flesh. It was the smell that filled our ship after Lewis died. A smell that didn't just come from his body, but from ourselves. Because in that moment, we all died a little too. And Theodore, he bloomed. We couldn't move. We could barely even breathe. Lewis's mind had been violated by something far beyond human understanding, and now it was inside Theodore. And he wasn't afraid. He was smiling. Lewis's blood was still splattered on his suit, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on something beyond us, something only he could see. "The gardener is here." "Who the hell is the gardener, Teddy?" Harper screamed, her voice hysterical. He blinked slowly as if processing the question. "He is the one who cultivates, the one who waters, the one who prunes," he answered. Something twisted in my stomach. Prunes? I murmured. Theodore turned to me, and for the first time in my life I wanted to claw out my own eyes so I wouldn't have to see what I saw. He was no longer human. His face was still there, but it was wrong. Like a mannequin trying to mimic human expressions, but getting the details wrong. The smile was too wide. His eyes blinked out of sync. His skin was damp, as if he had just been born, and he chanted, "Not all flowers are worthy of the garden. Some must be removed." "What does that mean?" Harper sobbed, her voice shaking with panic. Theodore tilted his head to the side. His neck cracked like breaking twigs, and then the voices started. At first it was a whisper, something crawling inside our heads, like a thought that wasn't ours, words that didn't need sound to be heard. Then came the choir. Voices, many voices, murmuring, all at once forming a chaotic hum like a swarm of insects burrowing into our skulls. "Cut the skin. Open the eyes. Hands touch the root. The sky is not a ceiling, the ground is not a boundary, the soil does not belong to you. The garden was sealed, but you opened the door." The chant slithered through our minds in a language that was not a language. Harper started sobbing. She pressed her hands against her ears, but there was no blocking the voices. They were inside. She wasn't the only one suffering. Ivan fell to his knees, slamming his head against the floor over and over. He was muttering something between clenched teeth, something that sounded like out, 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 out. And then something in the ship groaned, something big, something above us. The ceiling of the ship turned translucent. It was metal. It was metal. But now, it was glass, and beyond it, we saw him, the gardener. He was not a cherub, not an archangel, not an angel. He was bigger, much bigger. He hovered above us, drifting in the void, a colossus of flesh, eyes, and fractured wings, like a shattered miracle. He had no face. He had no form. He shifted, he molded, and inside our skulls he spoke. But now he wasn't recalibrating. He had found the right channel. Theodore. Theodore's body convulsed violently. He threw his head back and opened his mouth, and he began to speak in two voices at once. One was his, the other wasn't. "The horde sows the blackened earth. The flesh is the soil. Growth requires nourishment. The roots of heaven are hungry." Each word twisted the world around us. The metallic walls pulsed, as if breathing. The floor became warm and soft, like living flesh. And then Theodore turned, his head to me, and he laughed. "We were never meant to come here." That was when the hands started emerging from the walls. Human hands. Skeleton hands. They stretched out from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, clawing at the air, bony fingers. "Reaching for us," Harper screamed. Ivan began to pray, but his words belonged to no human religion. The hands grabbed Ivan first. They pulled him into the wall as if it were black water, swallowing him into the pulsing metal. He screamed until his mouth was consumed. Harper ran, stumbled, fell. The hands crawled across the floor, latching onto her ankles, her wrists. She couldn't fight. Her face was the last thing to disappear. Her mouth trembled, whispering something to me. And then, only Theodore and I remained. His laughter echoed. Through the ship, he looked at me and his voice rang out again. The gardener showed me, now I see, now I am part. The wall behind him opened, like an esophagus, and Theodore walked into it, and he was gone. Silence returned, but the ship was still breathing, and out there beyond the glass, the gardener was still watching me. The silence does not exist. Not really. Even in the vacuum of space where sound should not travel, there is something that always speaks. It is a deep whisper, buried beneath your consciousness, where thoughts dissolve into nothingness. You may call it instinct, intuition, madness, but I know what it is. It is what has always been above us, the one who cultivates, the one who harvests. And now it has found me. The ship was alive. The metal pulsed like an immense heart, exhaling a damp, sickly, Heat. The walls sighed. The corridors had changed. They were no longer linear. They bent, twisted, stretched like metallic intestines. I ran. I ran without knowing where to go. I ran through corridors that led nowhere, through doors that sealed shut before I could reach them. I ran while something crawled behind me. Something ancient, something hungry. And then space around me shifted. Suddenly I was in a field, but not a normal field. The ground was not soil, it was flesh. A terrain of living, breathing skin trembling beneath my feet. The wind that blew was warm and humid, thick with the scent of something that had been dying for millennia. And there were trees. They had no leaves. They had faces, hanging from the branches like rotting fruit, mouths frozen open in silent screams. I recognized Harper, Ivan, Lewis. And then I saw Theodore. He stood in the middle of the field, his back to me. His body trembled, as if something inside him was trying to escape. "Theodore," my voice came out weak, broken. He turned slowly, and I saw what he had become. He still had a human shape, but only on the surface. His eyes were empty, hollow, deep, gaping holes carved into his skull. His skin was translucent, pulsing with something alive crawling beneath it. He smiled, and then he opened his mouth. The light was always here. We simply refused to see it. But now I see. His voice was multiple. A chorus of impossible whispers. Overlapping, multiplying. He took a step toward me. "The gardener wants to speak with you." My chest tightened. "I don't want to hear." His smile widened. "But he is already speaking." And then I heard, truly heard. The sound came from everywhere, from inside my head, from inside space itself, from inside existence, and I saw him, the seraph, the peak of the hierarchy, the true god of the void. He loomed above the universe, within the universe, behind the universe. He was the universe. His body was a constellation of mouths and wings, shifting like smoke adrift in a current. He had no need for eyes. He saw with everything. And when he spoke, the cosmos trembled. "You are the weeds," I felt. My body bent. My skull vibrated. My spine crumbled. My heart raced beyond the limits of possibility. The soil must be cleansed. My vision darkened. My blood burned. My consciousness began to expand. I saw everything. I understood everything. And finally, I comprehended. We were never the gardeners of the universe. We were never the explorers, the conquerors. We were the weeds growing between the stars, and now the garden needed pruning. I felt my mind begin to unravel, as if my very identity was being burned from the fabric of space-time. I was going to disappear. I was going to be harvested. But then Theodore grabbed me by the shoulders, and for the first time, he did not smile. He showed me a way. He held my head between his hands, and I knew what he was going to do. He pushed me out. Suddenly, I was falling back through space, through time, through existence, falling back into our universe, alone. And before I vanished, the last thing I heard was Theodore's voice, and he was laughing. The rescue ship found me drifting near the edge of our solar system. I didn't know how, I didn't know why, but I was alive. And now, I knew the truth. They asked me what happened. I told them, and no one believed me. But they will, because one day humanity will dare to step into their garden again, and they will be there, waiting. The angels never sleep.